Okay. I'm going to try to follow the precedent set earlier and not stand here. We'll see if this works. And I can say I'm not a stand-up comedian by any way, shape, or form, though perhaps in another life that could happen, who knows. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here and be speaking with you all on this very important theme. I'm going to talk first about diversity, something we've been talking about all day. You know, what is the relationship between our theme first in the class and diversity and professional development and excellence? So that's going to be my focus today. And I'd like to say that I think that building on the last point that you made in your conclusion, that we are poised to be a model for how we can ensure success of our undergraduate students, I'd like to think we're also poised to be a model for how we can ensure the success of a diverse graduate student body. So the first thing, let's see, there we go. So this is my first experience with clickers. Hopefully it will go well. So this is a real quiz because we had a presentation on this earlier today, right? So everybody should get this question correct. So let's start now. This was presented to us all this morning, if you were here. If you arrived late, I don't know what your definition of academic engagement is, right? We just heard about that if you got here late, but probably had a good reason. Okay, so everyone should get this. I'm just going to give us a moment. All right, we don't have a high participation level, but let's go to the answer to not spend a lot of time on this. Thank you for helping me with this. The chart is fine, yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, so here we can assess our own academic engagement. The correct answer, oh wait, so we have to click here? Okay, thank you. So there's the correct answer, in fact, 13%, right? So that's how we're doing so far in terms of our doctoral student population. Let's go to the next one. Thank you for helping me with this. We'll get through these clickers pretty soon. So this is just a sort of, again, this is a review. We heard a lot about this morning. You can see from this slide what's happening at the undergraduate level in terms of our Hispanic enrollment is an increase, but at the graduate level, we see a flat line. So that's important to note, and this is the same information presented in a different format with the increase in Hispanic enrollment at the undergraduate level, but a pretty flat line at the graduate level over these past few years. Okay, so now let's talk about gender. So what percentage of our doctoral students identify as women? I don't think we were given this fact this morning, so you have a better reason. Now we have to click on this, right?
Yeah, it's already...
It's going? Oh, you turned it on. Thank you so much for helping. This is an example of collaborative instruction that we heard about earlier today. We're doing it right now. We see it before us, so let's see. Okay, we don't have a high percentage, but let's go to the answers and see what people came up with 39. Okay, now so what do we have here? Most people pick B, and now we can go to the next slide. And in fact, good job. We have 40% female, and let me apologize for the fact that there's only 2 categories here. Hopefully at a future moment, we'll have more than 2 categories when we get to talking about gender. So we're doing better in terms of gender distributions at the doctoral level, but what about in all fields? Let's talk about this. So STEM fields, and so here, engineering, physical sciences, ICS, and bio-sci, what percentage of doctoral students identify as women? Okay, with 37 or 38 people, let's see what the answers are. All right, so we have pretty mixed opinions. Some people think it's 11%, some people think it's 20%. Let's go to the answer, and we can see, I guess I could use this, couldn't I? Yeah. So we're doing better, but I think there's more to be said here if we break this down further, depending on which school we're talking about, right? So we're doing better at this. Okay, oops. I think I skipped a slide. There we go. So what about at the master's level? I've been talking about doctoral students. So here we see at the master's level, in terms of ethnicity and race, we see 12% URM. In terms of gender, we see 44% female. So again, we see disparities in terms of race and ethnicity at the master's level that more or less parallel what we see at the doctoral level. But in terms of gender, we see a little higher percentage of women. Okay, so why does this matter? Why are we talking about these numbers? Again, I think this is going to echo some of the things we talked about earlier today, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. I'm going to give you a number of reasons. You can think about which ones you agree with, if any or all. So some reasons why diversity matters at the graduate level. One is equity. If we have systems that select only for certain of those undergraduates who complete their bachelor's degrees and excel and not others, then that's a problem. Innovation would be a second reason. Of course, there's many kinds of diversity. Race, ethnicity, gender are only some of those kinds of diversity, but having people with different kinds of backgrounds approaching a problem can lead to innovative solutions to that problem. It can lead to questions being asked within disciplines that might not otherwise occur to people in those disciplines. Another reason that graduate diversity matters is excellence, right? Our theme for today. And this is an example from, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Fisk-Vanderbilt Bridge to the Doctorate, which is a program that attempts to bring underrepresented students into a master's program and then transition them to a PhD program. And so this example was given to us by Kevin Stassen, who was one of our decade speakers who came out and presented. And this was a woman who was admitted through this program who he said he could not reveal her GRE score, but that it was typical of someone from her ethnicity and gender background. And look what she accomplished. Now, I'm not an astrophysicist, but this to me seems pretty impressive. She made this discovery about particles, something having to do with light. I think this is pretty impressive. So here's someone who could have been missed, if one didn't, use a broad set of admissions criteria. We just heard about this important point that our demographics are changing nationally and of course in California as well. So, it's important to ensure that we have a very diverse set of people getting into higher education and postgraduate education. And of course, if we want to have a diverse faculty, we need a diverse pipeline leading into that faculty, right? And so we can see the drop-off. We've talked earlier today about how diverse UCI is at the undergraduate level. We're less diverse at the graduate level. So how then do we achieve, a diverse faculty, right? So there's another reason. So graduate diversity, I would argue, is one, not the only measure, I should say measure, or I guess matter works equally well, of program excellence, right? So that's why it matters. But as we try to, as we just heard, it's not enough to have access. It's not enough to bring people into these graduate programs. We need to ensure that they're successful. How can we do so? We've heard a lot of ideas today. One thing I want to talk about that we can do to try to promote graduate success for all students is to promote professional development. Okay, so I was going to give you a definition of professional development, but since this is interactive, I thought instead of doing that, I'd let you see if how you're defining professional development. So I put a list of activities up here. Please choose your answer. Which of these is an example of professional development? Okay, we've got a pretty good level of participation. So yes, very good. 98%, pretty high score. All of these things could be, so even the person who put A is not wrong. Really, all of these things would be examples of professional development, this and more, right? Trying to enhance students' abilities as we just heard, is needed in the workplace to do a broad set of things, not only acquire the content that they get in their discipline. Okay, so there's the answer. All right, now why do professional development? One thing, I don't know, has everyone seen this before? How many people have never seen this? Okay, just a couple people. A lot of you have seen this. So these are data that we compiled that show the outcomes in terms of career choices of our doctoral students. So what you can see on the top, the difference between these is the top one is, I don't know if you can see the schools are listed below. Can you read it? It's kind of small. For me, one of the key factors, if you look at campus overall, both at 3-year post-graduation rates for our doctoral students and at 5-year post-graduation, you can see the number of students that are achieving or that are entering tenure track careers is hovering around 25%, okay? And yet, we often train our PhD students to pursue academic careers. So are we adequately training them for the other 75% of occupations that they go into, right? So that's something for us to think about. Now, professional development should help them whether they go into an academic career or a non-academic career, but certainly, broadening our definition of how we're preparing our students could be helpful. Also, funding agencies are increasingly calling for professional development. I just pulled this out as an example from an NSF call for proposals for research traineeships that emphasize the importance of having professional development. Here's how they define it: technical and transferrable professional skills such as teamwork, ethics, communications, teaching, leadership, and project management, right? So this is something they want to see their trainees getting. So national funding agencies are emphasizing this. So what's the connection between professional development and diversity? The goal is really to give all of our students the skills that they need to be successful in their PhD programs and in their subsequent careers. Not all of our students want to pursue careers in academia, right? And again, I think professional development will help you no matter what you go into, right? So what can we do to help to support our students' professional development? And how can we ensure that we have diverse students in our graduate programs to work with in the first place? Well, so one step is at the point of admissions, right? And this is something I think we've talked about a lot on our campus already, so I'm not going to emphasize at length here. But one thing that we can do at the admissions stage is to use a holistic review process, right? Where we don't just consider a limited number of measures as we're evaluating who's likely to be successful in our doctoral programs, but we look at a wide range of measures, right? Not just GRE scores, for example, but other kinds of skills. And then to assess not only their what are called here cognitive characteristics, but also non-cognitive characteristics, a term we may not encounter that much in the admissions process. So here's a definition. I'm getting these from a Council of Graduate Schools report that was produced on holistic review. So that refers to variables relating to adjustment, motivation, and student perception. So that's one thing we can do when we're assessing students to determine who we should admit in the first place. Okay, but then professional development and other kinds of things, we can work with students after they come in to ensure that they're successful. And I really like these quotes in terms of thinking about what we might need to do. And I put this graphic here of sort of building a scaffolding to support our students while they're going through their doctoral studies. So I think this is really interesting to think about. Institutions should be careful to remember that the admissions process is only one aspect of a graduate program, and that learning environments matter. Student success depends on much more than applicant qualities. And I think this is something we can all ask ourselves. Often I think there's a tendency to ask ourselves, well, did we make a mistake in admitting this student, rather than saying, have we created a proper learning environment or the most supportive learning environment possible for our students, right? And this was referred to earlier today as well, the idea that there's one way of looking at the situation when students struggle is that of a deficit model. If we look at a situation where as a student's struggling, we might say, well, this student's missing something. We need to figure out what they're missing. There's a problem, right? The student has a problem. And if that's the case, then we might only focus on the student and not ourselves or institutional transformation in trying to solve the problem, right? So that would be like a deficit approach versus a strength approach, in which we might ask a different question. And this, a good example was given earlier when our keynote speaker talked about low-income backgrounds or a first-generation background, and how that might lead people to be more creative in some ways because they're sort of forced to be creative, right? So how can we look at the backgrounds that our students bring in, not only at the undergraduate level, but at the graduate level from a strength perspective, where we can redefine those things in ways that can support them and build on them. So I was told to make this interactive, and I thought that beyond just doing clicker questions, I would actually have us discuss something for a moment, right? So what I'd like to do now is to take a few minutes. How much time? Am I out of time? Not really? Okay, well, do we have time? Yeah. We have time, thank you. Okay, why don't we take a few minutes, and I want you just to, I'm not gonna read this to you, you can read it yourself. Take a few minutes and talk to someone near you about this scenario. How could we approach this as faculty? What could we do in this situation to benefit this graduate student? So just take a couple minutes and talk to someone near you. All right, I think it's been about 5 minutes. So I'd like to hear from some people what you concluded about this situation. Does anyone want to volunteer a few suggestions? What's going on here? What's your analysis of the situation, and what might be done? Does anyone want to jump in? I overheard your conversations. I'm tempted to call on you. Not all at once. Okay, yes.
So I'm actually in student affairs, and I direct a center called Student Outreach and Retention Center. But I have my doctorate in education, so I was that graduate student. And the first thing that triggered for me is the importance of creating academic families and the role that advisors can play in creating a collaborative environment within their advisees and supporting that. Personally, I was sharing that my advisor was not very intentional about it, but we began to create that culture. But I've seen pods of advisees that really do not only create a sense of family, but then support each other in doing research and publishing and finding jobs and all of that. So I think making sure that we integrate the value of family within our academic world.
Okay, thank you. So integrate the value of family into academic world, right? So that the student, in addition to having his family at home, he would encounter a family in academia. What other suggestions or analyses? Yes.
Just very briefly to identify if there's an unmet financial need and whether there was anything that we could do to solve those kind of problems if having to work to pay for things is a problem.
Okay, so try to analyze the person's finance and to provide an additional financial support. Any other comments? Yes.
So sometimes students have trouble making the transition from undergraduate life to graduate life and the sort of culture of asking questions as opposed to just answering them. And so some students are able to just jump in and start right away, and others need sort of more stepping stones. So you can provide, more well-defined projects or some sort of smaller piece to cultivate confidence so that the student can make it to the next step.
Okay, so provide stepping stones to help the student get to that point where he could start to exhibit those characteristics the professor's looking for.
So I had a different take. I didn't think the scenario was about Mark. The scenario was about us and about the assumptions that we brought to it. Nothing in the scenario says that he's not doing well on any objective measure that we would use to assess. And nowhere in the scenario has anyone asked Mark what exactly the problem is. Instead, I read it more as a raw shot. Like, whatever your issue is, that's what you brought to the interpretation of the scenario. So it was really more about us than about Mark in the scenario, in my opinion.
Okay, that's a really interesting observation. I think that's an important point. You guys who want to move on to the next talk, just cut me off because I could keep soliciting comments on this. I think there's a lot to discuss here. One more, okay? Oh, good.
Oh, thanks. I actually completely agree with that. When I read this, there were a couple of things that happened. The first thing I thought is that someone needs to talk to the faculty because of all the assumptions. That was number one, what you just said, right? But the second thing that came to my mind was Okay, so why is there an assumption that spending significant time with family is a negative? Because especially, if I were to think, let's say the student were Latino, right? All that I know about Latino students would be that family is, not that it's not important to lots of other people, but that it's incredibly important, and it might be the very reason why Mark is in school, right? And then I also thought about, what does that mean that we're immature if we spend more time with our family? Right? And then the other thing is, I could just picture people shaking their heads and saying they made a mistake in admitting him, because we tend to think more highly of students who divorce themselves from their family and move forward in an individualistic way, as I was saying earlier, rather than thinking about things in terms of the collective. So this is like a really Western approach to thinking. And yeah, I definitely think someone should talk to Mark. And just because you're quiet doesn't mean you're not listening. I think the analytical thinking might be an issue, but that's something you can pull out of people, and it's also something that you can work to teach people, right? So I thought about the faculty, not Mark.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are really thoughtful set of comments. I'm sure there's a lot of more comments out there. We're out of time. I'll just say I made up this scenario myself. I didn't find it anywhere. I based it on a number of things, one of which was an attitude or a comment that was made about me when I was a graduate student. My very first quarter at Stanford, where I had gone to UC Berkeley as an undergraduate, had been in huge classes with 500 students was a large class, 300 was medium size, and 100 was small in my definition. And I didn't know how to be in a seminar. And one of my faculty members wrote after my first quarter, she's much more like an undergraduate. She's an undergraduate mentality. So not all of this applied to me, but some of it. And then the rest of it was from sort of literature that I've read, attitudes I've heard or encountered, and perspectives and so forth. But anyway, I thank you for indulging this exercise, and I think we need to move on to our next presentation. So thank you very much.